Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to attending this webinar titled Harden Your Home Against Wildfire. My name is Linda Azevedo, and I'm the current chairperson of the Oak Hill Area Fire Safe Council. So I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Alice Cantelow. Some of you may know Alice from her years of experience as a UC Master Gardener or her work with the California Native Plant Society. As such, she's given our Fire Safe Council great advice on how to landscape for wildfire safety. But for the past 2 years, Alice has set her mind to studying how to make our homes more resistant to wildfire. With both a science and a business background, Alice is prepared to wade through the technical details of new and retrofitted enhancements to the house, finding improvements that are both effective and cost-effective. We're so fortunate to have Alice as a Fire Safe Council board member and as a committee chair for defensible space education and home hardening. And so let's get started. Alice, I'm turning the meeting over to you.
Okay, thank you, Linda. I'm going to share my screen here. Get to the right spot. Okay. I want to thank you all for coming today. It may not be a big group, but I know it's an important group, so I'm happy to be able to share what I've learned with you. I've been able to look at a lot of the studies that have been coming out, and I want to kind of synthesize that and let you know some of the things that are really important for hardening our homes, because what you do really might make it so that your home can survive. There's a wonderful quote here from researchers Sifford and Keeley that I'll be talking about later. You know, we don't fight earthquakes, tornadoes, or hurricanes. We adapt and build smarter. Let's think about doing the same thing with fires. Fire is a natural occurrence in the Sierra foothills where we live. Climate change is, of course, intensifying that. But when a house is lost, it's not just a house and a building, it's a home. And so we really would like to reduce that for everybody. So each person's sphere of wildfire resilience, we have a number of goals. We're trying to reduce the energy of the fire. We want to make space for firefighters to be able to help us put out the fire, and we want to reduce the chance that our own house will catch fire, that it will ignite. And so when we look at these various zones here, really reducing the energy of fire and making space for firefighters to help, those are the two things that defensible space really does. By reducing the energy of the fire for ourselves and for our whole community, that helps the wildfire not be giant, and making space for firefighters is helpful. But in terms of reducing the chance that our house will ignite, really what's most important of all is the first 5 feet and the house itself. And so that's really where we want to focus. We want to focus on the house and that first 5 feet so that we don't burn up. Our house doesn't burn up. Defensible space is great, but in terms of saving our house, they're finding more and more that really it's the first 5 feet that are more important than anything. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the little things that can make really a huge difference. Some of them are very cheap, maybe not a little more time consuming than we would like. Then we'll go a little further into some items that are a little more expensive. We'll then look at major building retrofits and talk about what the 2008 code is and whether we do or don't want to actually do those retrofits. We'll talk about making priorities. And lastly, each person making their own plan because every house is unique. So some of the studies early on, some of them were experiments through the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They have a wonderful facility back east, I think it's in South Carolina, where they build these houses, they have it on a turntable, they spin it around, they bombard it with embers, and they see what happens. And then they change parameters to see what makes a house burn up. There's also a wonderful kind of summary of some of this. This was written back in 2010, so it's about 10 years old, but it's by Jana Valakovic, I pronounced that wrong, Valakovic, and Stephen Quarles. It's through UC, and this is really a wonderful resource. But from these various studies early on, before 2008, the biggest takeaways were that most homes are being lost to embers, and that first feet is critical. And so studies truly are showing this. And so again, with those goals of not letting our house ignite, you know, we may all think about a wall of flames is coming at us, but that's really probably our third worry. and a fairly small one. Of course, you have to worry if a wall of flames comes at your house, but even if it doesn't, and well before and well after, you might have other problems. One problem is radiant heat is actually a bigger problem with catching your house on fire. That can be from a house that's very close to yours, or maybe your own vegetation with radiant heat. But by far and away, as I said, the most important one, the one we should constantly think about, is embers, because that's how most fires burn up, most houses burn up. So these are windblown. They, again, this is the Angora fire. Look at all that vegetation around that house that did not burn, including pine trees that are very flammable, and yet the house did burn. The Angora fire, I forget how many houses it burned, but you can see how an ember would have come right into that house and something managed to ignite it and the house was completely lost, like many others. When we think about embers, you might think about those, little tiny things, but they can be big. They can be like this, hand size. They can be 6 inches by 6 inches. They even use sometimes 12 by 12 inches embers when they're doing some of their experiments. So you can think of one of those that will have you have enough energy when it lands on a deck like this underneath that it can actually slowly smolder and then cause it to burn. And if you think it's just experimental that they're bombarding houses with embers, this is what it actually looked like at a real fire. And you can imagine that some of those embers are bigger than they look. So again, I already talked about the things we're going to be looking at, and the whole time though, I'll be focusing on embers coming in at that house. Embers coming in and what they will do and how we can prevent it from starting the house on fire. So let's start though by looking at simple things, because there's a lot of little things, like I said, that we can do that really make a huge difference. So this is a house, and all those little flames are places where that house can burn. And once it starts in one place, houses don't usually burn halfway. They usually either go all the way or they're spared. Although of course there's some that go a little way further. So let's look at some of these things. All right, this is one. This person actually has done pretty good defensible space. You look at the trees in the back, they're nicely limbed up. They don't have any branches right over the house. They don't have, it looks like they've come out here past the house pretty well, but they forgot about the bushes that are right next to the house. And those are probably more important than anything because they're touching the deck. The deck is touching the house. And so those bushes really should not be there. And that's old kind of thinking that we used to have of, oh, let's have foundation plants. That just doesn't make sense in places like ours that are fire prone. And so those plants really should not be there, especially if they're juniper. How about the plants in the window box? Same thing, especially if that window box is wood. And here you have a fire right in front of a window. And just like in the winter, we lose heat out the windows. In a fire, you bring the heat in through a window. The windows are particularly vulnerable, so you don't want a wooden planter box right below a window. How about the wooden furniture? So many of us have, wooden chairs and things on our decks. That same thing, an ember can come, start that on fire. It gets the deck on fire, the wooden wall behind, and there goes the house. How about decorations? Maybe you have a basket with some dried flowers. That can be a real problem. We have I think I missed something over on the side there. Yes, I did. So you see the wood pile there on the right. Wood piles really should be 30 feet away, and 30 feet's a long ways away in the middle of the winter when you're trying to get your wood, but it just makes sense. And even your garbage can. We always had our garbage can right next to the house, as maybe you do too, but plastic doesn't just melt, it actually can burn first. And so that garbage can, especially if it has some recyclable paper inside of it, can also be one of those things that can start the house on fire. Let's see. Okay, the chimney. We all heard about chimney arresters. It used to be a big deal. It still is, but it's just that there's so much more. Even embers can come down the chimney. That's probably not so much of a problem, but don't forget that you yourself can start a fire. So those chimney arresters are still pretty important. And of course, we all know about pine needles and leaves being on the roofs. We don't want those there. Be sure and keep those off. And what do you have stored in your garage? In your attic? So if embers do get up into your attic, is it going to hit cardboard? Is it going to hit paper? We used to store all of our kids' old school papers up in the attic until I realized that was really kind of dumb when I got into the fire stuff. And so we actually took everything out of our attic that was flammable, which was pretty much everything. So even the things you have stored up there can be a part of the problem. Let's see. I think now we are over at the garage on the far left. And there's no particular door there, but most garages have a door, and that seal underneath the garage is really important. You may think, oh yeah, no problem, I've got weather stripping there. That's what we thought. But then when we actually looked at our weather stripping, we noticed that on the far corner, this is kind of hard to tell from this picture, but the garage door is up, and you see on the far left that rodents have eaten away. That's a hole that's about 2 inches big. That's plenty big for a big ember to get in there. And if it starts to hit something, again, it can burn our house from the inside out. So it's not too hard. Go ahead and look at your own. It's not too hard to fix that. You can buy weather stripping and fix it. You can even buy it, especially that's rodent proof, so it won't get eaten again, or you can just stuff steel wool in there. And what are you keeping in your garage? I'm sure your garage is neat, but some people do store things like papers and flammables. And so if those embers do get in there, what's it going to hit? So we've talked about all these simple things. Let's look at the roof too. There's the skylight there. Skylights are often left open. And so it's really important if we do all these things, to try to make it so an ember can't come in. The simple thing like closing a window is really important. Do you just leave your skylights open? How about your garage window? What about a window maybe for your cat? What about a window in your bathroom? If we get to an evacuation, you've got to make sure that every one of those windows is shut, or it doesn't matter what you've done or how much money you spend ahead of time, the embers can get into your house. So all these little things that we've done, let's move on then to something that's just a little bit, oh wait, I forgot the mulch. We look underneath the door there. Let's talk about that for a second. Mulch is a great thing in gardens, it keeps the water in, but you don't want it right next to your house. They found that bark mulch really can smolder and start a whole house on fire. So this is kind of a typical thing. People like to put it around their plants right next to their wood siding. You don't want to do that. You want either gravel there or even bare dirt, but something other than something that's flammable like that. And lastly, I think over there on the deck, in between to the right of the garbage can, the deck itself that you might have there, and this is a simple thing you can look at. When you first built it, it probably looked about like that. You had nice gaps, there was no dirt there. Maybe that's what yours looks like right now. Or maybe yours looks like one of ours, where the gaps are completely filled, and that stuff can, instead of the embers falling through the gaps, it will now ignite those little pine needles and detritus that's in there. And so that's, again, a relatively simple thing you can do, just keep that stuff clean. I say simple, I guess I really mean cheap. All this stuff can take time. So those are all the little things. Let's move up to things that are just a little bit more expensive. And one thing we're looking at there is the fence. A wooden fence that goes right up to your house is a vulnerability because the fire can hit the fence, can be burning and take just like a fuse, bring the fire right to your house. So you don't have to worry about the whole fence. You don't need to take the whole thing down, but that last 5 feet, if you could make it either a just wire or a metal gate, or somehow make it so that your fence does not connect to your house, that can help. Coming back to the pine needles, you may know that it's kind of a pain constantly getting those pine needles off and those leaves. And so gutter guards can be a wonderful thing there that make it so that you don't have to do so much work and still help. It can be expensive though, but it can be extremely helpful. They come in a lot of varieties and styles. The quality can vary dramatically. You can get cheap ones that have big holes, but often they end up falling in, and they probably aren't always really worth it doing it. We used some of those before and we were pretty dissatisfied. There's also solid ones, lots of different styles. Like I said, solid ones, and the leaves can pretty well fall off of those, but it's not sure that the water actually works as well. And you can still get buildup if they're fairly flat like this one. There's foam ones. They recommend you do not use foam gutter guards because the foam can actually burn, just like leaves can burn. And then what really works well in our area are micro mesh ones. There are a number of different brands that have micro mesh. They fit, the mesh is very small, so pine needles and leaves don't get in there. We've had ours for about a year now, and it really has been working well. And you screw those right in. It's fairly time consuming and expensive putting them in. If you can do some of the labor yourself, it is significantly cheaper. And then we should remember that even gutter guards do need maintenance. This is some buildup on a gutter guard behind it that didn't fall off. And so if the fire comes and gets that stuff burning, if there's no flashing, and metal flashing like that can really help, then it might burn the underlayment of the roof. But in this, if you have the flashing there, then even if you have a little bit of stuff like that last picture, then it should be okay. Okay, one more little more thing would be caulking. So you see the wall there on the left. Pretty much everybody's walls has some holes in it, or not necessarily holes, but gaps. So say anything that's 1/8 of an inch or bigger, you really need to be concerned about. So search out and destroy those gaps. There are special caulking that is actually considered fire safe. I know 3M makes one, maybe other people do too, and it actually expands in a fire. It's more expensive than normal caulk, but we've been using that now on all of our gaps, and one advantage is you won't get ants anymore either. So all these X's represent the things we have done so far. Those little things, those medium things, all of that adds up to a huge difference in this person's house. So don't think those things aren't important. They are. But now let's also look a little bit at the big stuff, the stuff that is really expensive, but can also be a big help. So a lot of the studies done before 2008, and actually before 2005, people are trying to figure out how all of us can live more safely in fire-prone areas like we're in. And all those studies, and they were showing about the embers, and they led to a new California building code for areas like ours that are fire-prone. And that landmark year was 2008. It first came out in 2005. It was expanded on in 2008. And since then, there have been little adjustments, but people pretty much refer to it as the 2008 code. Now, none of us are going to rebuild our houses. And in the Oak Hill area, about 2% of us have homes that were built before 2008. That's not very many. So most of us have houses that were, did I say before? I meant after. Most of us have houses that were built before 2008, 98% of us. And so the question is, some of these things may not be all that much more expensive if you're building a new house, but in terms of retrofitting it, then we can talk, pretty extensive money. So what exactly is it that we want to do? Well, before we know what we might want to do, let's look at the building code itself and see even what's there. So what kinds of things we'd be considering as retrofits. And the 2008 building code includes roof, the eaves, the vents, the windows, the deck, the porch, the stairs, the siding, exterior doors, and outbuildings. It covers pretty much the whole house. So we're going to look at each one of those just a little bit. For the roof, it requires you have a Class A roof. Probably most people have that by now, because when we all re-roof, I think it's required that you go to Class A. But it's also important that you have no gaps. So maybe you have a roof that's tile, but there's gaps in the end. So you need to make sure those are filled. Maybe instead you have an asphalt roof, and that does meet Class A, but they are finding maybe it's not quite as safe as some of the others. And remember too, you see the roof there on the lower right, that's a metal roof. The gutter there had a lot of leaves in it. They caught on fire. The underlayment below the metal caught on fire. This was during the car fire. And so even though it was considered a fireproof roof, nothing's really fireproof. And so you have to be careful about those gaps. Another thing in the 2008 code is the eaves. And they require people who build homes now to enclose those eaves. A lot of us have houses like this where the ends of our rafters are exposed. An enclosed eave looks like that, where it's filled in with a non-combustible material like fiber cement. Another view of one, this one has a vent in it. And so speaking of vents, with the 2008 code, houses now need to have mesh that is 1/8 inch or smaller. Now, back when most of our houses were built, 1/4 inch was considered the gold standard, but they know now that that's just not okay for fires, because embers of that size can get into your either attic or below into your foundation and can actually start a fire. So it should be 1/8 inch or really preferably 1/16 inch, when that's about the size of an insect screening. It should be a non-combustible mesh too, so you don't really want fiberglass there. Even aluminum isn't great. Better would be something like brass or something. For the other option is to have ember flame resistant vents. They make some fancy ones now. And let me show you what they look like. So here's taking off an old vent. If you're trying to do this retrofit, isn't too hard. Get a crowbar and you can pull off. There's that 1/4 inch vent there on the left. On the right, you see we're installing in the same hole. You can buy them in certain sizes. This particular brand is Vulcan. There are 3 brands that are California approved as being ember resistant and flame resistant. One of them is Vulcan. It has a honeycomb there inside that melts together at high heat. It also has still that 1/8 inch mesh on one side, or actually I think it might be 1/16 inch. So that's one. There's also this brand here, Embers Out. It has a matrix instead that's steel wool inside. And then a third one is Brand Guard, and they use baffles. And you'll see later though that these approvals are only good for a year. And so you kind of have to keep up on, maybe there'll be new ones next year. But all of those tend to be fairly expensive. They're like about $30 per vent, which if you have a lot of foundation vents and a lot of eave vents, that can really add up. But another simpler retrofit to try to meet that code is this kind of a mesh. And so this is insect screening you can buy. We recently bought about 50 feet of this. It's bronze. We couldn't find it in any local stores, so we had to buy it online. But it's not as heavy as we thought it would be, and so it actually looks pretty useful. So again, we're going to be putting some of that over our soffits. In general, soffit vents don't have as much vulnerability because of their orientation. Things that are facing those ember storms vertically, which would be your foundation vents, your eave vents, and your gable vents, those are much more dangerous. The soffit vents that are underneath here are probably fine for just putting on that simple screening. Same thing here where this soffit actually already has the holes in it. This is probably a fiber cement product. Theoretically, those holes should be 12 inches away from the wall, though. They shouldn't be quite so close as that. In fact, I think that's even code. Another part of 2008 code are the windows. They all need to be dual paned now, and one of the pane needs to be tempered glass. Probably very few of us with homes before 2008 have that. You can look for a tempered glass in the corner. There's a little logo there that says whether it's tempered or not, but usually it's just the screen doors or maybe a large plate glass. But now people need to do that on all of them. For the dual pane part, you can see what happens if you don't have dual panes on the right there. The outer glass, because in a fire, you get lots of different, like the frame is at one temperature, the glass is at a different temperature, and it can get breakage. In this particular case, the outer pane broke, but the inner one didn't. When you have just one pane, it can break. And again, as soon as you have a big hole like that of a window, then those embers just get inside the house and it burns from the inside out. That's why dual paned are so much better. And again, though, it can be pretty expensive changing all the windows in your house. So another thing you can consider as a retrofit is screening, which reduces the radiant heat anyway that these windows experience. It doesn't help if there's a flame right there. So, and this again is with the screening. I think I started to mention this before, but the worst screening actually is aluminum, even though it's metal. They say that fiberglass is better than aluminum, and the best of all is bronze. And so that's why we went to buying that online. Another window to consider are skylights. The flat ones do have tempered glass. Maybe you have domed ones, they're usually plastic. And if you have a steep roof, the risk is usually nearby vegetation with the radiant heat from a tree. On the flatter roof, though, you can get lots of debris and overhanging branches. So you just kind of have to think about what you want to do about your skylights. One thing might be, instead of replacing them, is just making sure there's no branches overhead. There are a couple of skylights that most skylights do not meet a Class A roof. And so most skylights really are combustible. But there are a couple that are approved on that California approval list. There are these that are actually translucent panels between metal. And there's solitubes. I don't know if anybody has a solitube, but that's one that actually meets the California Fire Marshal approval. Another part of the 2008 code is siding. It needs to be non-combustible now or ignition resistant. And for the non-combustible, what that can mean is 3-coat stucco, which is something that can be retrofitted, not cheap. Also, there's fiber cement, which is, maybe you've heard of Hardy board. There's other brands. It often comes in lap siding, but doesn't have to. It can also be vertical panels like this, similar to the T111 that a lot of us have. And it even comes in some shingles that sort of look like shingles. But this fiber cement is considered non-combustible, which means it won't start a fire. But just like a frying pan with the food inside of it will burn, it doesn't really meet the 1 hour rating, I don't think, because if it gets real hot, the stuff underneath can burn. For the ignition resistant siding, there are various fire retardant coatings, and for that, I'll be talking again later about the list of California approved products. So one other thing to do, perhaps, rather than replacing all of it, which is very expensive, is to try to be strategic. So for example, here you've got siding right next to a roof. So if you have flame there on that on that roof edge where you maybe have some material that has accumulated and you have wood siding right there, that's really a vulnerability. So that might be a place you for sure would want to replace the wood siding with something that was non-combustible, like fiber cement. Here's another example of a place where there's a roof this particular roof may or may not be Class A, but it's got stuff on it and it's right next to a wood siding. So that again is siding you might want to think about replacing. Or here's another example. What about the siding that's right next to a wood deck? That's another place where the siding is particularly vulnerable and you might want it. Maybe they don't want to change that whole wall out that's real big and doesn't seem to have any plants in front of it, but maybe they want to do something about the wall that's right next to their deck. Speaking of decks, if they're attached or within 10 feet, they cannot have a non-combustible walking surface anymore. I mean, they must have a non-combustible walking surface. They can't have a combustible walking surface anymore. So what that means, obviously masonry or metal qualifies. So you can have a raised patio, you can have a patio, that's all non-combustible. But oddly enough, a lot of other things are actually approved as non-combustible, including solid wood, if it's next to non-combustible siding. So you can have a solid wood deck as long as it's next to fiberboard siding. And there's a long list of which ones. It includes some IPE, some bamboo, some composite, a lot of composite, some thermal modified wood, all kinds of different things you can theoretically put on your deck. The part of the problem, of course, is these things are all good when they have not weathered. As they start to weather, it's questionable as to how long they stay non-combustible next to something like fiberboard even. With composite deck boards, again, some people think that, oh, change to composite and I'm fine. That's not necessarily true, especially the ones with the grooves, like on the upper right, they are particularly not very good with flames from underneath. And the ones that are hollow are not very good with a firebrand that lands on the deck. But there are quite a few composites that are on that California list. But again, in general, solid ones tend to be better. So you can look at, if you have composite deck, you can look and see if yours is solid or not. But the stuff that's on top of the deck really does matter. So when they put these things through a test, I think that's a composite on the left and on the right. This is at that place in South Carolina I was showing you. And you can see that there's quite a difference in the two surfaces. The one on the right would probably pass as being approved. So to find those accepted building materials, there's a lot of dead ends online to find those, but this will be up on our website. So this particular link does work and you can get there. And this, for example, is a listing for one particular decking material for one particular company. And you'll see again that it's only good for 1 year, but it tells you exactly, it's got a Class A flame spread. And so then you know what it is you have to do in terms of siding. Kind of complicated though. And lastly, with the 2008 code, it includes outbuildings. If the outbuilding is greater than 50 feet from your house, there's no requirements. But if it's less than 50 feet from your house, there are specific requirements depending on how big the building is and how far away it is from your house. So things like chicken coops, barns, sheds, all those things now have requirements if they're less than 50 feet. So in terms of retrofitting, there's a number of things you can do. You could try moving one of those buildings if it's really close to your house and it's obviously ignitable. Or you could try putting some ignition resistant materials on it and a metal roof. Or, because again, it's not just that it's going to burn up, it's that it can actually risk your house burning up if it's less than 50 feet away. Oh, that's right. You can also make a vegetation-free zone. Just make sure that you don't have anything there that can catch a spark also and make it even more likely to burn up. So all of these big retrofits can be expensive. I mean, if you had all the money in the world, you could just redo your house as a 2008 house. But even that, I mean, is upgrading to a 2008 code even worth it? And they did studies of the campfire. This is actually a McClatchy newspaper study. And of the homes that were burned up in the campfire, they found that about 18% of the ones actually that were built before 2008 survived. So not every house in Paradise burned. Almost a fifth of them, even the ones that were older before 2008, survived. But of the ones that were built after 2008, half of them survived. So the difference between 18% and 51% to me is significant. And you can decide for yourself if it's significant or not. Again, you can do all these things and your house can still burn up. It can still look like the campfire down there in the lower right. But you can certainly improve your odds. And again, these statistics are real people with real houses. These are the Carroll family, and that's their house, and it survived. And the other house next to them, which was their parents' house, did not. So that was it. Then in the campfire, they saw that that really did help the 2008 code. But what about that insurance company experimental place? They took a building, and this is a duplex, and on the right-hand side, they did all the things that basically meet that code. They had closed-in eaves, they had fiber cement siding, they put in dual-pane windows with good screens, they had rock mulch, and the deck, actually, instead of being one of those approved products, they put bitumen on the joists and increased the joist spacing so that embers would fall through. On the left-hand side, they had open eaves, wood shingle roof, which hardly anybody has anymore, single pane windows with no screens, bark and wood chips for the mulch, and a standard deck. And here's what happened when they bombarded it with embers. So it actually started at the bottom. The mulch caught on fire. It was close to the siding caught on fire, the deck caught on fire, and it moved up the wall. And then you can see it's already starting to go into the attic a little bit at the top there at the vent. So that's kind of the standard thing that happens with a house in a wildfire, but the one on the right is in perfect shape, and they both had the exact same ember storm. So that's fairly impressive. So, but even so, every fire is unique. Some of the campfire was a huge wind-blown megafire. Every house is unique. Your location is unique. And when several attributes are present in a house, like the building code, are they all helping, or is there one or two in particular that are helping, that are really more important? And so, we'd like to know which are the really important ones, or does it have to all be together? And so people have been studying this, and one very good recent study by Alexandra Sifford and John Keeley, which was published just last year in September 2019, so it includes studying the campfire. They looked at the structure loss all across California for 5 years. And they divided that into a number of different regions. And one of those regions is the Northern Sierra, or rather North California, the interior, which is part of what we are. And so they looked at all the fires, they looked at the homes that survived, and they used some interesting data, which was provided by CAL FIRE. I'm not sure if it's CAL FIRE. Anyways, provided by California, where they go out after a fire and they assess the homes that have been damaged. And they look and they try to record a whole bunch of the attributes. And they've been doing that since the 1980s. And so they were able to tap into that data set and try to see, well, what really is helping these homes survive? They looked at, for our area, they looked at 23,000 homes that were destroyed and about 1,000 that survived. That's one thing, unfortunately, about this data set is it doesn't have a lot of the homes that survived because they're really focusing on the ones that were destroyed. They're especially focused on defensible space. Those data collection people are especially trying to figure that out. But even so, it was a useful data set, and they found some interesting things. They looked at the campfire, the butte fire, and the car fire. But of course, the campfire kind of overwhelmed those data with the 19,000 homes that were destroyed in Paradise. Another, sorry that this is hard to see, but another really good study that has not been published yet, but he gave a talk in February at a webinar, and he's also looking at the campfire. He used their data set and also another data set that includes more of the surviving homes. He's in Denver, Colorado, but gave a very interesting webinars, which is available online. And then there are also some great syntheses of some of these studies. There's one written by Stephen Quarles, who's kind of a standard name in vulnerability of buildings to wildfire. And also Jana Valakovic and Steve Quarles have written another one recently in April 2019 about home survival in wildfire prone areas, looking at a number of these studies. And again, all of these include the campfire, which is one we of course all care about. So that earlier study I talked about, Sifford and Keeley, it's a little confusing to look at their data, but you see statewide on the far left, then the Bay Area, then the North Interior and Southern California. One thing that's interesting, on the far left in orange would be defensible space. And it's not, and so the thing on the far left is sort of how significant it is. And it doesn't look, from their study, that defensible space was really all that important, which was kind of a surprising find. And other studies are starting to find that really, maybe what's in the first 30 feet is more important than what happens further out. And now, of course, they're even focusing more on just that first 5 feet. It doesn't mean that defensible space isn't important, though. Again, it can reduce the energy of the fire for the whole community. It also can make places for the firefighters to be able to fight the fire, but it may not be the end all for keeping your own house safe. The other thing that's interesting from this, and if you look at the blue, which really stands out in all of them, and at every region and statewide, and that's the eaves. This particular study, anyway, really kind of showed that closed eaves versus open eaves, like we all have, are pretty important. Let's look a little more closely at just the north interior here. So another thing in the north interior, which is us, is that the defensive action, which is the second one there, the green one, was the most important thing of all. And that means whether the people themselves fought the fire, or firefighters fought the fire, or both fought the fire. It's all included in there. That doesn't mean that you should risk your life, though, to save your house. But it does mean that that defensible space might be important out there for them to be able to fight your fire. It also means that the access on your road might be really important so that they can get in to fight a fire. And also it means that if all of us evacuate, there's more of a chance that the firefighters can help homes not burn. As part of the problem of the campfire is that they were so busy trying to save people's lives that there was no way they could even think about trying to save any homes. So if we talked about the eaves and the defensive action, then the three on the far right, the window panes, the exterior siding, and the vent screens all did show as being significant in our area. But again, almost all this data is from the campfire. The campfire was a very extreme fire, and they're looking at data mostly from houses that did not survive because of the data set they had. So you can't, this isn't the end all. You wouldn't say, okay, I'm just gonna start with this and then I'm gonna go to the next bar and then the next bar. But it is interesting to see what some of these preliminary results are starting to show. Jana Jalochovic and Stephen Quarles put together what they felt were the structural survival priorities for a wildland fire. And they felt that the roof and the vents were the most important. They don't have eaves on this list at all, and so I'm thinking it might be included under roof. And again, of course, they're talking about embers. They then have defensible space as the third priority, and then fourth, fifth, and sixth are windows, decks, and siding, with siding being last, which is interesting because siding is one of the most expensive things you can do. Again, this is what they felt from looking at the studies they'd seen. And then that fellow Austin Troy from Denver that I told you about, who did a study with 2 different data sets from campfire and was able to look at more surviving fire homes. He found that his feeling was, and again, this is not even published yet, so this is somewhat preliminary, but again, limiting the openings for embers was real important. So he found the double pane windows definitely increased the chance of a home surviving. Closed eaves again, the ignition resistant siding and roofing. And for him, newer construction was anything since 1995. I'm not sure how many Oak Hill Fire Safe Council homes fit in that. I know mine does not. And that one of the worst things was a mobile home. Found that just about all the mobile homes burned. And so that's a pretty big risk factor if you have a mobile home. And I'm not sure if this is just ones that are in a mobile home park like we have in our area, or if it's individual ones out on property, which we also have in our area. So it'd be interesting to look at that. But if you're in a mobile home, you really want to concentrate on all those simple things, keeping vegetation away from your home and evacuating early. And going on, some things that definitely decrease the chance of a house surviving, we're having decks at grade, being on a slope, having outbuildings, probably because they're often within that 50 feet, and lots of grass and leaves and needles. And he also found that the building code seemed to have increased the chance of survival for houses. So again, these are preliminary, but people are really trying to figure out what is it that can help all of us, our houses survive. What was interesting in Austin Troy's study is he found quite a few things that he felt didn't seem to have any kind of statistical significance. In the first data set he looked at, the DINS data is that one I talked about where they went out and looked at damaged homes after the fire. Vegetation management didn't seem to matter after 30 feet. Combustible patio or not didn't seem to matter. He didn't feel that wood decks showed that they mattered, high or low. And he thought that the building shape complexity might matter because they know that interior corners tend to burn more easily because you've got two walls next to each other. But he said, nope, it didn't seem to have any significance. And then he had his other data set, which also included more of the surviving homes, that we call it the D-space data set. They found that removing dead trees, grass, stumps, logs didn't seem to matter. Enclosing the eaves in his study didn't seem to matter on that one. The vent screens, the combustible siding, the low wood deck. So again, every fire is different and it's hard to make generalizations, but some of this first stuff is coming out. So in looking at all these diverse studies myself, I came up with what I think is more or less the importance of retrofits. And one of the first important ones is that you have good road access and good defensible space for the firefighters. Next would be having a Class A roof, but almost all of us have that. But you want flashing at the edges and gutter guards so you don't have those leaves and stuff up there on the roof. Enclosing the eaves, there's too many studies that are showing that it seems to be really a pretty important one. There's only one study that showed it wasn't. Vent screens, definitely the 1/8 inch or less, and or the ember flame resistant. Then thinking about the decks and porch material, then the window panes. And even if you can't replace, with double pane, at least make sure there's no plants below. And replacing maybe your fiberglass screens with metal ones. Some people even talk about having heavy shutters. I expect that's expensive too, or putting plywood over their windows. But if you're trying to evacuate, I don't think myself that it's real reasonable to be running around putting plywood over my windows, but maybe you'd have more time. And then again, the last one seems to be exterior siding, replacing with non-combustible, unless you do some strategic retrofitting like we talked about earlier. So the important thing is to evaluate your house. What direction is your biggest danger from? Where's the topography, the wind, the vegetation? People who are on a slope, are you at least set back at least 30 to 100 feet from where that slope ends? Because that's a lot safer than if you're closer to the edge because that fire comes roaring up those slopes. And this is actually Oak Hill area. Let's see if I can orient you. Kind of in the middle is the North Fork of the Cosumnes, moving up to the right. And over to the left, we've got the Martinez. And so you can see that basically our entire Fire Safe Council, the prevailing wind is more or less from south-southwest. So that's probably where a lot of your danger is coming from. But don't forget that a fire can create its own wind too. But this is just sort of a background to think about when you're figuring out where your biggest danger is from. So once you figured out that, then how close are other houses? How close are your own or neighbors' outbuildings to your house? That all matters, as to which side of your house you might want to spend more time retrofitting. How risky is it here anyway, fire-wise, in the Oak Hill area? It's kind of interesting. If you look at a map of the Camp Fire over in Paradise, is up in Butte County, I don't know if you can see that there, but there's a lot of fires on top of each other in Paradise. And it turns out in California, they found that where one fire happens, they tend to happen over and over and over in the same place. My brother-in-law lived in Magalia, which is near Paradise, and he said, yeah, they seem to have fires every time you turn around, they're having another fire. And so that obviously is a high-risk area. If we move out a little bit and look down at El Dorado County at the bottom, there are a few high-risk areas in El Dorado County too, but we are not one of them. That red arrow is pointing to the Oak Hill area, and you can see there's no fires there. The one below it is probably the Sand Hill fire, which was over on the Middle Fork, between the Middle and the North Fork. When was that? I don't know, 10 years ago maybe less. But other than that, like the King Fire up there actually is on top of a couple of other fires. So in that sense, it's kind of encouraging. If you look a little more closely here, there again is the Oak Hill area, and all those grays are various ages of fires that have happened in El Dorado County. On the other hand, if you look at the fire risk maps that are created by CAL FIRE, not such a great story. This is the Oak Hill area outlined in black. You see the Cosumnes River down there at the bottom. Those brown lines are the Pleasant Valley Road on the top, and then coming down in the Oak Hill Road. And the yellow is a moderate fire risk. That's still considered, a risky area. Certainly insurance companies consider it that way. That's considered fire prone. The pink is the next higher level, which is a high risk, and the red is a very high risk. So our entire council is in, a moderate to very high fire risk. And if you come to one of our meetings, we actually have this big, and you can see exactly your parcel to see where you fit. We also have this online, but remember, this is somebody's best guess. And so it could be wrong. But this is somebody's best guess as to where the fire risk is in our area. And that gray over there is all BLM land. So they don't record what it is there because the state doesn't cover federal land. Okay, so we talked about what you're going to do at your house. Let's just try this with our house, just so you can kind of see some ideas of the kinds of things you might actually look for. So we looked at our house and thought, wow, we have some vulnerabilities. And so the first thing we did is we took that deck and we moved it back 10 feet. It used to be connected to our house. There was an old patio underneath. We knew that, so we just took 10 feet out. That was, pretty cheap. Here's some of the other things we did, though, all these arrows. Let's start on the left. The water barrel there we collect rainwater, and we collect a lot of rainwater at our house. Well, just like the garbage can, that can burn. And so we realized we needed to replace that with something non-combustible. Next to it there, the chair. We used to have a wooden chair there. Now we have a metal chair there. It's a nice thick steel wood chair, and I find it very comfortable. The deck that it's on, we had decided that because it was covered, that even though it was kind of old, it was in pretty good shape and was probably okay. But we were wondering if we should do something about the siding next to it. Next to that, the arrow there, that fence used to have wood that went right up to the house. We just took that wood out. So now there's 5 feet of fence that's just wire. Up above that actually was a plastic container that collected bat guano from a bat house. We've taken the bat house out too, because coronavirus is probably not something you want by your back door. And the plastic has been thrown away. Also, the next arrow there, lower below the windows, you see we actually did replace all of our foundation vents with that special ember resistant vent. And then the next arrow would be the ping pong table. We used to have a wooden picnic table there. Now instead we have our metal ping pong table there, and our picnic table is out further away from the house, which we actually like better now. We also, as we walked around the house, we did find some places where there was decayed wood, and decayed wood burns at a much lower temperature and is much less safe. So we did replace whenever we found some of that decayed wood, which is a good thing anyway. And then what we did too is a really good thing to do. Right after one of those big windstorms in the fall, I walked around and actually took pictures all the way around the house because I knew I'd forget. And so here's where a lot of leaves collected after just one night. Now, if we were away on vacation for a week, you can get a foot of leaves there probably. And this isn't too bad on the left-hand side of that door where we have a foundation of cement. But look on the right-hand side, that wooden T111 siding that so many of us has came right down to the ground. And as more leaves collect there, that was and it's an interior corner. We felt that was a real risk area at our house. Also, you see the old cat door there has been eaten by rodents, so we have quite a big hole there. So you just kind of walk around your house and find things like that. We ended up replacing all that. So you can see we put wood over that hole in the door. We've actually built a little brick wall in front of the T111 so that now there's something for the leaves to be against that's non-combustible. We did replace all the siding with fiber cement in that area because we felt like it was rather a hazard area. We replaced again that plastic water tank with that metal one right there. We did close in the soffit up there on top above the water barrel. And we did change the fiber cement, so that's pretty much everything there. We're still thinking we'll put a metal kick plate on the wooden door to make it more fireproof, fire resilient. And so we have decided, again, partly because of all those studies, that we are going to go ahead and replace, or rather close in all of our soffits. This is a big job. We're going to do the labor ourselves, which will save us quite a bit of money. Just an example, this section here probably cost about $100 in materials because we already had the 2x4s. We have a lot of old wood. So, but the actual fiber board is going to be about $100 just for an area about that big. We figure it'll probably take us about 5 years to do the whole house. We're not going to do it all in one batch. This stuff is heavy. It's a pain to deal with, but that's what we're doing with that. Then we did replace one of these single pane windows that was in our garage. We've been waiting a year. We finally found one on Craigslist, and so we replaced the window there. And you see the next arrow to the left, we did build another little brick wall there to get ourselves up above the leaves. The next arrow back there is another fence, where the wood was connected to the house. Now it's not. The next one is a place where we had a plastic water barrel. Now we have a cement tub that collects the water. And lastly, the arrow, we had some nice little shade-loving plants there, but we took them all out. we actually were able to move them to a different location, and some of them we just destroyed. This is Lester up in front. I say we, he actually did most of this work. But anyway, so there's Lester up at one of our gable vents, measuring it to put some screening on over it, that one. We felt it wasn't too much of a hazard because we don't get any accumulation of leaves or needles there. We do, however, plan to replace that siding, which is now wood siding, with fiber cement, probably in the next year or two. And underneath him, we have a porch there, which had fiberglass screening, a nice screened-in porch. We plan to, actually we bought the stuff now, we're gonna replace all that fiberglass screening with bronze screening. We're also, the steps in front are about 30 years old. They're really, you know, old wood. We're gonna replace that probably with either brick or stone. And we have already, again, taken all the plants out that were under those windows. We replaced those vents. We're gonna let that little grape, which is very small, stay there for a little bit. And another big project we're looking at is taking out this whole deck. Even though decks weren't considered a huge risk in some of the studies, some of them it was. And we know this deck is 30 years old. The wood's really old. It needs to be replaced anyway, so we plan to replace it with a raised patio, and at the same time to replace that wood siding at this particular place with fiber cement. And we put on metal furniture again instead of wooden. We have gutter guards on all of our gutters now. And the very top arrow, that little arbor used to connect to the house. We just cut 3 feet off of it. And so now at least it's not connected to the house. That just gives you an idea. And the whole time we're doing this, walking around, we're thinking about our trees and how they burn. And really big mature trees, they don't put out a lot of flames. I mean, look at that. That's not big flames. But you look at the embers up there coming off of that one tree. And it's, again, it's the embers. It's not the flames off of these trees around our house that we're worried about. So think like an ember. Walk around your house. Where can an ember enter a gap? Where can an ember hit something combustible? Take photos in the fall after a windstorm. Most of all, prioritize. Don't think you have to do everything right away or even at all. Make a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, whatever makes sense for you. You can have a house and do everything right, and it can still burn. Look at the trees behind this house, though. They're pretty close, and that's not what started this house on fire. It was the embers, and maybe it was just one little thing. Maybe they accidentally left a window open. Maybe they had a broom against, you know, another place, or next to a wooden chair that was next to one part of wooden siding. Or maybe they did everything right, and they were just unlucky, and the fire was just crazy, and they're in that 50% of homes that didn't survive. To help you, though, there are some really good online resources. One of them is UC's Homeowners Wildfire Mitigation Guide. And on our website, on the Oak Hill Fire Safe Organization, .org, I've taken a lot of information from that, and I've synthesized it and put it together so that you can read up on specific parts that you want to, or you can read the original. We have the link to that also. And we also talk, you can see about roofs, skylights, eaves, gutters, siding, windows, each one of those. If you click on those, you get more detail and also get referred to other documents. So there's a lot of help for you on our website. So again, just going back to the beginning, we don't fight earthquakes, tornadoes, or hurricanes. We adapt and build smarter. Let's do the same for fires, because it really can make a difference. All of this is expensive and takes work, can be expensive and can take work, but this is expensive and takes work too. Losing your house. So home sweet home to you and all your loved ones. Know that the Fire Safe Council is here for you, and we're working hard to make it better and make our community safer and help you with information. Thank you very much for coming. Are there any questions?
If there are questions, feel free to use that raised hand, or feel free to ask it through the chat window. While we're watching for that.
I see a question.
Selma has a question. So you are welcome to unmute yourself. In fact, if you unmute yourself and ask the question.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Dan. We just recently moved up this way from the Bay Area.
Well, welcome.
Well, thank you. We feel like we died and went to heaven on earth here. A couple of questions. Okay, so we're new here, is Oak Hill area, is that south of Pleasant Valley Road?
Most of it is south of Pleasant Valley Road. However, the people who access Pleasant Valley Road between about Cedar Ravine up to Big Cut are in our Fire Safe Council area. However, we never turn anyone away. And so if you're outside that area, you're always welcome to join us.
Okay, so we're over here off Motherlode and Lindbergh.
Okay. And, you know, if you email me through the website at info@oakhillfiresafe.org,
Okay.
then I can try and match you with another Fire Safe Council that's close to you.
Oh, okay.
Also, the El Dorado County Fire Safe Council has a Facebook page, and they often share information from all the fire safe councils in the area. And all of us at different times are hosting different different informational meetings, and you might find some help that way.
Okay, so we're not on Facebook, so that eliminates that.
All right, well, email me and I'll help you any way I can.
Thank you very much. Okay,
Of course.
can
You're
I ask
welcome.
two other quick questions?
Of course.
Okay, we have the bark, the wood bark all around our house and with our plants in there to keep the weeds down. Is there any fire resistant or fire retardant bark on the market, or should I just be getting that bark out of there?
You know, if the bark, you're probably talking a bark that goes further out. It's really only the first 5 feet where you really don't want that bark.
Okay,
It's
well,
okay if you have it, 10 feet out or 15 feet out, but if you can get it away
No.
from your house and either put gravel there, or there is a study online that they looked at a number of different ones, but really, other than rock or pumice or dirt, there's not a lot that's non-combustible, or hardscape. You could, think about putting a walkway there.
Well, it's actually right up against the house and for about 2 feet, and then there's a walkway, around it. So I think the best thing to do would be take the bark out of there.
Probably so, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, I've got an area like that too. That 2 years ago when we moved here, well, a little more than that, but we put new bark in there, and sure enough, I got to pull it out.
Yeah. Okay, and one other question. You were talking about skylights. We have those whirlybirds on top of our house. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the vents, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, the whirlybirds, the ones
that go round and round. I've heard, yeah. I would go to the UCANR site that we have referenced on our website, and I think they talk about those whirligig ones. They have a long thing about skylights and vents, and I'm pretty sure, I can't remember exactly what they said, but I think they're included on there.
Okay, we were looking, the people around our neighborhood that have them, cover them up in the winter with just bags,
Plastic bags.
and that keeps the cold air out, but it seems to me that plastic would be highly flammable. If
They're made out of plastic? Oh, I mean the plastic bag, right.
Plastic bag cover.
Right.
So do they have, okay, I'll go on that website and see what they recommend for covering.
Yes, see what they recommend. I don't have them myself, and so I didn't look at that part, but I've seen them referenced and talked about.
Okay, all right. I had one other question, but go ahead, let somebody else ask a question. I'll think of my own question.
Well, thanks for your question, and also welcome to the area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I'm really not seeing any way I look at this. Nothing in the chat either. Alice, I can't thank you enough for your thorough work. This just seems like a wonderfully researched presentation with latest information. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you all for attending.
Hit that again.
Ah,
Oh,
hand wave. Yes, go ahead.
yeah, okay, so We just took out a big oak tree next to our house, and I'm talking like 8 feet from our house, and for insurance purposes. But on both sides of our house, our neighbors have just rows of the pine trees. Now we're about 50 feet away, but when they blow, I mean, it blows north, and we're north of their property. I've mentioned it to my neighbor on that side before, but and I was trying to be very diplomatic about it. But is there anything else that I can do other than just say, hey, I'm concerned about your trees?
Actually,
as
yeah, there is.
fire ladders.
There is. First of all, I'm not sure if exactly when you mentioned fire ladder, you want to hope that there's nothing underneath those pine trees that's going to take the fire up into the pine tree. Big mature trees are actually usually pretty much okay, but the county does have a vegetation management ordinance, and everybody is required to have good defensible space. And that doesn't necessarily mean everything's cleared, but good defensible space out for 100 feet from other people's houses too. So if their tree is within 100 feet of your house and you feel like it doesn't meet the defensible space requirements, you can contact the county. What I've heard is that they will then come out and look at every house in the neighborhood and, kind of look at defensible space, but you can make a complaint to the county.
Okay, yeah, I kind of wanted to avoid that.
Yeah. Does it have ladder fuel? Is there vegetation underneath it?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe talk to them about even that, but maybe they could keep the tree if they could get rid of all the stuff right under it.
Yeah, like I said, we just moved here, and we want good neighbors.
Right, understandable. It can be tricky.
So okay, all right. So we'll just
We'll do that. We'll figure it out.
we'll figure it out.
But thank you very much.
One more thing that comes to mind regarding that is sometimes you can go to the CAL FIRE station and ask for them to come give you advice on your dispensable space. And you're probably, I don't know too much about the roads, but along Mother Lode, there's that Y, and at the Y, there's a CAL FIRE station, I believe. And when we first moved, my husband stopped in there, and they were happy to come out and give us some tips. And so if you have tips
that might be the way to
CAL FIRE, that arms you with a little bit more information when you discuss with your neighbor.
Well, yeah, and I guess that would be a good way to do it, is have them come out and survey our property.
Right.
And as they survey our property, they can't miss these huge pine trees. So, it just might make them or whoever just walk over there and just mention to the neighbor.
Or again, if you say there's a lot of shrubbery underneath the tree, you might even offer to cut that part out for them. I don't know. Again, that's probably the bigger concern, is the ladder fuel underneath the big tree.
I don't think there's a lot of plants underneath there. I think it's more dried
leaves and branches, and I mean it's all combustible. But we'll figure something out.
That sounds like a good idea. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, with no other questions, I'm sure we all have things to do this evening or something important to get off to. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us for this webinar. This is actually the first webinar we've put on, and you've helped us all practice just a little bit more too. Again, Alice, wonderful information. I made a lot of notes myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you
all. Selma, do I see one more comment?
Yeah, Alice, are you still there?
Yes. Yep. Oh, yes. Right there.
Okay. Alice, so you were showing us your house, and you had a little deck out there on your side door out there. Did you did you ever, and it's a wood deck and you're taking that out, which is good. Did you ever consider products like Trex?
Yeah, if you go to that,
I
the
mean,
place where they look at what?
we use Trex in the Bay Area, and that was one of the things that they suggested as decking is the Trex, because it's very fire retardant. And you were talking about ripping it out and actually putting in a cement porch as such. I was just wondering if you had researched Trex. Trex is a heck of a lot cheaper than putting in cement.
Yeah, it actually meets that California approved list. There are some Trex products on there, but that means you do then have to have fiber cement walls to be the code.
Okay.
And so it's not just Trex. Lots of the composites are on that list. Yeah, like I said, even solid wood is on that list.
Yeah.
But the way it meets the code is by also having the fiber cement, or at least the non-combustible siding. Yeah, for us, and even though it meets that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would make it for a really big fire. And so we ourselves felt that we're just going to go with brick.
Yeah.
But that is an option. You're right.
Yeah. I just, I mean, you know, we moved up here and we feel like this house has a lot of opportunity for repair. So we're definitely going to be in a 5-year plan.
I understand.
Thanks very much. Alice, I see Doug has a question. Doug, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment. Can you hear me? I'm through my phone.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I just I've been associated with the Fireside Safe Council now for a number of months. And Alice, I was just going to say, what an outstanding presentation. I learned every time you give us a talk, even though I'm sort of in the business and I've read quite a few things. I'm always surprised of how much more I learned. So I just want to say thank you, and we appreciate it so much that you put all this together.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, with that, I think I'm going to close the meeting. Remember, we're going to try to make this available on our website. If there's anything you missed or want to review, this will be a first time trying to do that, though. It might take us a couple days. All right, and welcome. Again, watch our newsletter or our website for latest news. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.